Good morning and welcome to today's session on process improvement. My name is Paulette Maluski with Kirkwood Community College, Training and Outreach Services. And we are about to spend the next 30 minutes with Dean Bliss talking about one of my favorite subjects, lean. We've seen its impact on both the manufacturing floor and in office settings. And while Dean is new to consulting with Kirkwood, he's about to share with you 15 years of experience. And I had the pleasure of first hearing him speak at the Iowa Lean Consortium. He's a founding member of that organization and has served on its board of directors. So you too may have heard him speak at numerous lean events and seminars throughout the country. His experience with financial services, healthcare, IT, manufacturing, and he holds a bachelor's of science in business and administration from Iowa State University. So before I hand it over to Dean, I just want to mention at the bottom of your screen, there's a little toolbar that you can click on if at any point throughout this presentation you want to ask us any questions. So welcome everyone and welcome Dean.
Thank you, Paulette, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We're going to talk a little bit about this thing we call lean. Here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about what lean is and where it came from, how it works, some of the keys to success. We'll talk about a thing called the 7 forms of waste. We'll look at a listing and it's a brief description of some lean tools, and then we'll have a little summary. So let's start at the beginning. Always a good place to start. Where did lean come from? It's a derivative of the Toyota production system. It's been modified and changed and updated over the years, but that's essentially where it started. And the reason it got noticed is there all of a sudden Toyota and Honda and some of the other Japanese car companies started coming to the US in the 80s with higher quality and lower cost vehicles. And the big 4 automakers at the time were thinking, well, how is that working? What are they doing different that we're not doing? So some guys from MIT decided to go study what was going on at Toyota, and they came back in 1990 and wrote a book called The Machine That Changed the World, the story of lean production. That's where the word lean first appears. It's not an acronym, it doesn't stand for anything. It's really just an observation that the factories at Toyota look very different than the factories at GM and Ford and some of the others. So this was kind of a snapshot of here's what we saw from these guys from MIT, but it didn't really tell you how to do it. So these MIT guys are pretty smart, and they said, well, let's write a book about how to do it. So in 1996, Lean Thinking came out, and this one really talked more about some of the early adopters, some of the techniques and tools and so forth that were used to make Lean effective in these a handful of organizations. So that's just a little background, a little history of where this stuff comes from. A couple of quotes out of that second book I wanted to kind of highlight. I'm going to read that first one to you. Lean provides a way to specify value, line up value creating actions in the best sequence, conduct these activities without interruption whenever someone requests them, and perform them more and more effectively. Now, if you had a machine over in the corner, you could flip some switches and throw and create what I just described, you'd be there, but we're not machines. There's a very significant people aspect to this. There's a very significant leadership aspect to this. And that second quote highlights that by saying lean thinking also provides a way to make work more satisfying by providing immediate feedback on efforts to convert waste into value. So as we look at these things, the tools are obvious. Some of the things are kind of basic, but there's a lot of people things going on here that really need to be addressed. Now, in that first quote, I underlined the word value, and I did that on purpose. I'm going to show you a few pictures here, and I'm going to illustrate a point. My father's got a place in a lake down in Missouri, and we go fishing there, and occasionally we have some luck. So in the upper left-hand corner, I'm holding a 3-pound largemouth bass. In the upper right, I'm holding a 5-pound walleye. At the bottom of the screen is one of my daughters who caught this little tiny fish after fishing all day long and not catching anything. So the question I would have for you is, which of those fish has more value? Well, most people pick the small fish that my daughter's carrying. But let's say I'm in a bass tournament. Which one has more value? The bass, because the other two have no value. What if we're having dinner? It's the walleye, because walleyes are better tasting fish. So by looking at those pictures, you can't tell which of those fish has more value. The person that knows which of those fish has more value is the customer, me. So without asking me what the value is, you don't really know what I want and what needs to be provided to help me be successful. And it's the same thing with our customers. A lot of times we think we know what our customers want. In a lot of cases, we don't. So the starting point for lean is really specifying value in the eyes of the customer. That's where we start. We don't start by trying to improve something. We don't start by mapping something or whatever else. We start by identifying the value in the eyes of the customer. Now, there's some common, because the word lean connotates some things, there's some things that people can assume or construe from that word. So I want to go through a few of those. First of all, it eliminates jobs. No, if you're using lean to eliminate jobs, you're doing it wrong, because that's not what this is about. It forces people to work harder or faster. No. What happens when you work faster? You tend to make more mistakes. We want to have high quality and speed and efficiency in what we do. So making people work faster is not the idea. The idea is, let's take away some of those things that people don't need to do and give them more time to do the things that add value. It's just quality circles with a new name. There's been lots of management fads over the years. There was total quality management, there was quality circles, there was re-engineering. Anybody that's been in business for very long has heard of some of these things. It's a different animal, and it's a different animal, and we'll get more into that. But there's a lot of support, a lot of background, a lot of things that make this a different way of doing things. It focuses on manufacturing operations only. That's where it started. And a lot of people at the beginning said, oh, it's about making cars. It has nothing to do with other kinds of manufacturing. Well, it does. Oh, it's not about retail. It's not about taking care of patients in a hospital. It's not about any of that kind of stuff. Well, yeah, it is, because you're using a process, and we'll get more in depth into that in a few minutes here. It was invented in Japan in the late 70s. That's where a lot of it got popularized and it got started. But you can go all the way back to Henry Ford and the moving assembly line to look for ways to improve efficiency. So it's really a conglomeration of a lot of things that have happened over the years, where things have been added, things have been subtracted, things have been improved to really create a system that works. Last one there says it's just common sense. Some of it is common sense, but some of it isn't. Some of it's different than the things we learn in business school. You can tell by my resume and some of those things. I've been around a while. I worked for Rockwell Collins for quite a few years. So there's a lot of things that we were taught in business school about cost accounting and some of those kind of things that are very different when we talk about lean. So how does this work? Have a vision and a case for change. When I talk about a vision, it's where do I want my company to be? Where do I want to be in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years? What does that look like? And the case for change is, why should we do that? What are the things that we can't provide to our customers today that we'd like to be able to provide to our customers tomorrow? So really understanding your organization and where it's going is a very key element to making this effective. Then we need to understand where we are. If we have a vision, we have a case for change, we need to understand how far away from that vision we are and what is that case. So where are we? Then we can decide where we want to be and define the gaps between the two. So defining those gaps says, okay, these are the things we need to do, and we need to look at our business maybe in a little different way than we have traditionally. Then we can start to plan improvements. Our tendency is, you're going to see some tools later on, so, oh, let's go map some stuff, or, oh, let's go do this, let's go do that, let's standardize our work, whatever it is. Well, it doesn't make sense to do that until you understand what your vision is. You understand strategically, where's your organization going? Let's understand that, and then we can start to look at the improvements that are going to help take us there. Because sometimes we can improve things that we don't even really need to do at all, and so we've wasted some effort there. So we got to be careful on how we do that. The box at the bottom says leadership determines the success or failure of any lean initiative. You can actually take the word lean out of there. Leadership determines the success or failure of anything. And if it's important to leadership, then people are going to pay attention to it. If it's not important to leadership, people are going to see that very quickly. So it's important to make sure that this is a comprehensive thing, and then we're just dabbling around in the corners. Some of the keys to success. My favorite one is that first one, and that kind of separates lean from some of the other types of improvement systems. Those who do the work should be those who develop the new process. This is about, with guidance, having the people that do the work take a look at what they're doing and have some suggestions and have some ideas. They already have them. It's just a matter of, can we implement them? Will they help us get where we need to go? Will they engage the people in the improvement and what they really want to do, and how is that going to improve our value that we're providing to our customer. Involve all affected stakeholders as we make these changes, as we start to look at ways to improve our business. It's going to affect people outside of our department. These things cross department lines, they cross division lines, all those different kinds of things happen. So we have to be prepared for that. We have to make sure that we understand that this is for the good of the company, and that we're not trying to sacrifice one division for a different division. Don't settle for the easy stuff. Essentially, you can get 5% better tomorrow. Anybody can do that. This is 20, 30, 40, 50% kind of improvements, and particularly with time. How much time things take can be reduced dramatically by some of the things we're going to talk about in a little bit. Have resources available. This is not free. It does take some resources. It does take some effort. There has to be a commitment to say, this is something we would like to do. This is something that is going to happen, and that's something we're not going to go back on. Related to that, do what we say we're going to do. It's real easy to get all jazzed up and say, hey, this is going to be great. And then we get busy. Oh, it's the holidays. We don't want to do anything. Oh, school's about to start. Oh, it's, spring break, whatever it might be. There's always a reason or an excuse not to do something. If you make a commitment, you got to make sure you follow through with it, or you're not going to get the results, and your customers are not going to see that value increase. And make changes now. In a lot of cases, when we do these things, we can have that improvement in place very quickly. We can work on something on Thursday or Friday and be doing something different on Monday. So it can happen very quickly if we're focused and we're doing the things that are going to add value. But what kind of things are we looking for? We've actually got a list. Imagine that. Our friends at Toyota have provided some information for us that's been very helpful. They had an engineer, his name was Taiichi Ono, and Mr. Ono would go out in his factory and he'd stand in one place. He'd find a place where he could see a lot of things, see the assembly line, the parts, and a variety of things going on. And he'd stand there for hours on end, watching the business, watching how things work, watching how the forklift trucks go back and forth, and where the parts are, and where the people are moving to and from, and really seeing where the waste, where the possible waste is. What kind of things would he like to fix if it was his business? So his notes, and he had copious notes, he had all these spiral notebooks everywhere. His notes became what became known at Toyota as the 7 forms of deadly waste. I don't like the word deadly, so I take it out. So I just call them the 7 forms of waste. But essentially, it's 7 categories of things that we can look at that indicate that there might be a better way. It doesn't necessarily tell us that there's something wrong, but there might be a better way to do things. So let's walk through these 7 things that are in those kind of indicators. Number 1 is waiting. Anyone waiting for anything for any reason. It could be you waiting for someone to give you something. It could be a customer waiting to be served. It could be a project plan waiting to be executed. All kinds of waiting, because what waiting indicates is I can't take the next step until something else happens. So that slows things down when we're waiting for something that indicates inefficiency. So that's one of the things we look for. We look for a thing called excess motion, which essentially is any motion that doesn't add any value. So if I have a supply closet that's down the hall and around the corner, and I have to go to that supply closet 47 times a day, that's a lot of walking. While I'm walking back and forth to that supply closet, I can't get any work done. So is that supply closet located in the right place? Am I located in the right place? Are there things that we can change to reduce that excess motion such that that's not taking up a lot of time and effort? Number 3 is moving items, and that's moving, it could be moving equipment, it could be moving parts, it could be moving paperwork, it could be moving computer files, it could be a variety of things. If we're moving things around, once again, we're not able to work on those things while they're moving. So we want to make sure we minimize that movement and make sure that that movement is adding value. Number 4 is a thing called fixing defects. When we talk about defects, it could be quality, it could be something clinical if you're in a clinical situation as far as a hospital or a clinic is concerned. Anytime there's a defect, and a defect really is something that doesn't go right the first time. That's what defects are. So it could be as simple as a phone call. I call somebody to get some information. They're not there. I leave a message. They pick up the message. They call me. I'm not there. We text back and forth, and I get out of range or I'm in the car or something, so I can't text back. That means I have to wait to get that piece of information or that document that I need to do the next step. So fixing defects isn't just the quality department, it's everyone working in the process that we're talking about. Number 5 is a thing called overproduction. And overproduction essentially is making too much. Are we producing reporting that nobody looks at? Are we creating computer files, setting them out on a SharePoint site or something like that nobody looks at? Are we making making parts and putting them in the warehouse, hoping to sell them someday? So we don't want to focus too much attention on producing too much, because that takes away from the things that we need to do. So overproduction is one of those forms of waste. Number 6 is inventory. And when we talk about inventory, it's, supplies and equipment are inventory. That's what we tend to think of. But if you look at that definition at the bottom, it says material or information that is waiting for processing. So if I've got a pile of things on my desk, or I've got a pile of emails that I haven't looked at yet, that's inventory work. Those emails have to be opened and looked at and acted on before someone else can take the next step. So we want to make sure that we have some inventory around it as we need it, but we don't want to have too much, because that's, again, slows things down. Number 7 is a thing called overprocessing. I've got the word approved up there because a lot of times this is approvals, and it's really doing things more than once. So when we talk about overprocessing, are we putting things in 2 different computer systems, the exact same information, because we don't have an interface and those 2 systems don't talk to each other? Are we having 7 or 8 or 9 people approve something when 1 or 2 or 3 people would be sufficient? Those kind of things. It's really wasted effort when we talk about doing things more than once. So these are the 7 categories of things that we look at to say, is there a possibility that we could do something better? Is there something we can do here to make this more efficient? I want to talk about a thing called value added, because a lot of times when we do things, there's a lot of activity that goes on, but some of it really adds value in the eyes of the customer and some of it doesn't. So I'm going to give you an example here. This is an example of a visit to the emergency room. I think most of us can relate to either being there as a patient or being there as a parent or whatever it is. So when we talk about that, if you look at the line across the top there, we've got some waiting that goes on when we first get there. We get triaged, we get moved into a room, we wait some more. We get diagnosed and tested, and we wait some more for the test results to come back. We get a treatment, and then the out process of the paperwork and the insurance and all that stuff on the way out the door. So if you look at the colors on this page, the green stuff or the dark stuff is value added time. So when I'm being triaged, diagnosed, and tested and treated, that's the things that I really went to the emergency room to get done. What's in kind of the gray area there is the non-value added time, the waiting and the moving and all that kind of stuff that really doesn't add any value to me, because all I want to do is get in there, get treated, and get better and go home. So that value added time, if you look at it, is a very small percentage of the total time that I'm in there. So let's say I'm in there 3 hours, maybe it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes where somebody's actually doing something for me. So that's a lot of wasted time. But our tendency over the years, as industrial engineers or whatever our discipline is to take a look at those value added items and say, okay, let's do that triage 2 minutes quicker. Well, so what? You're instead of 3 hours, you're now 2 hours and 58 minutes. Nobody cares. But if we can reduce the non-value added items, look at all the opportunity there is there. So let's take a look at an example of that, where our traditional improvement results might be fairly minor because we're just looking at that green stuff. Where if we look at the gray, look at that opportunity. So instead of 3 hours, maybe we can make it an hour and a half that somebody's at the emergency room, as opposed, and take away a lot of that waiting and a lot of that inefficiency as we go, and get a large amount of that time eliminated by looking at those things instead. So when we look at types of work, we've got our value-added work. This is where we're transforming something or providing a service that the customer cares about. It's kind of in the what color is that? Violet kind of color over there. That small value-added slice. There's a lot of non-value-added work, and that's fairly common. If you look at an office process, maybe 5% of the amount of time we spend on something adds value, and the other 95% doesn't. In factories, it's more like 10%. where 10% of the activity adds value and 90% of it doesn't. So there's a huge amount of opportunity. Some of that stuff is required. Some of those things we have to do. So that's the required section that maybe we can't mess with too much. But look at the size of the slice of the pie that's non-value added and pure waste. Weighting and all those 7 things we talked about earlier. There's where the opportunity is. Once we find that opportunity, then we've got some tools available to us, which is good, because then once we see weighting or something like that, well, what do we do about it? What are the things that we can do to make it better? So we're not going to have time to dig into the tools in detail, but I wanted to kind of introduce them to you. First one there is value stream mapping. Essentially, it's mapping out the process and putting some data to it so we can look at where the opportunities are, where is the most wasted time or the most wasted effort. Standard work, which essentially says, if there's 5 people doing something, they should all do it the same way, and it should be the best way. So it shouldn't make any difference, which clerk or which nurse or whatever it is takes care of the customer. They're doing it the same way. Error proofing, doing things to prevent errors from happening. There are a lot of interesting techniques of either reducing errors completely or making them more obvious when errors happen. So there's lots of things there. Visual controls, all kinds of things that we can do visually, whether it's things on the wall or whether it's things on our computer screen that can help us understand, we're having a good day or a bad day, or are things going well or things going poorly. 5S is a workplace organization technique. So you can make sure that you're not spending a lot of time looking for things, whether it's online or whether it's physically in file cabinets or in closets or whatever it might be. A3 is a problem-solving technique where you identify a problem. It's a way to quickly address that problem and put some solutions in place in a very rapid manner. A thing called quick changeover. So if you've got a situation where you're changing over in a factory from one product to another, or if you're changing over in a healthcare setting, exam rooms or MR machines or whatever it might be, ways to minimize that downtime so that we can get the most efficiency out of that equipment or out of that process, and again, take care of our customers in a more rapid fashion. So some key things to keep in mind: the 7 wastes. I've been using the 7 wastes in the whole 15 or 18 years I've been doing this. They've never failed me yet. The lean tools. Once you identify the waste, then you've got some tools available to you, some things you can fix and things you can do to really understand what that problem is and design a new process. And then what I call the lean vision, which is really learning to see your work in a different way. I love that phrase, learning to see, because that's really what you're doing. Is rather than being immersed in a process, you're kind of raising up above it and seeing the entire process, such that you're able to see if I do this, it's going to affect this department or that department or this customer or that supplier. A willingness to change. You can't do this stuff without changing. Change is a requirement because you're looking to improve that service or that product for your customer. And then the word continuous improvement. You're doing this all the time. It's not just a one-shot deal where you look at everything and say, let's just fix it now. Things change, customers change, markets change. All those things need to be addressed in a continuous fashion. So I run into people that say, well, I can't afford a consultant, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. And here's what I say: you do what you can with what you have, where you are. Some very large organizations have failed with this. Some very small organizations have been wildly successful just because they wanted to do it. And this, I'll leave you with this quote: the things that matter most must never be at the mercy of things which matter least. Essentially, that's what you're talking about when you're talking about taking care of your customers, is addressing those things that matter most and making sure that things that matter least don't get in the way. Okay, so that's our presentation for today. If you have questions, I think you can text, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. There's a chat toolbar at the bottom of your screen. You can type in questions and we'll take them now. And if you'd like to explore how you working with Dean could help move your business forward, our contact information is on the screen.